You collapse reality every single time you observe something. Every single time. And scientists? They hate admitting this. They squirm when you bring it up. They change the subject. They reach for complicated equations to avoid the simple truth staring them in the face. But here's what they won't tell you. What they can't tell you without undermining their entire worldview. Your consciousness doesn't just witness reality, it creates it. Now, you've been told this before, haven't you? Law of attraction, manifestation, quantum jumping. You create your reality with your thoughts. And maybe you've tried it. Maybe you've visualized, affirmed, aligned your energy. And sometimes it works. The parking spot appears, the money shows up, the opportunity manifests. But other times, nothing. Radio silence from the universe. And you're left wondering, if consciousness really creates reality, why can't I control what I create? Here's the thing nobody talks about. The missing piece hidden in plain sight. The answer has been sitting in physics textbooks for nearly a century. Not in the self-help section, not in spiritual teachings, in quantum mechanics, and it involves a cat, a very famous cat, a cat that is simultaneously dead and alive, not sick, not dying, both states at once, Schrödinger's cat. Now most people think this is just a cute thought experiment, a physics riddle for nerds. But what if I told you this paradox holds the key to understanding why your manifestations sometimes work and sometimes don't? What if I told you that Nobel Prize winners have speculated that human consciousness might actually reach out and collapse physical reality? And what if I told you that the reason scientists get so uncomfortable about this topic is because the implications are too radical to accept? Stay with me here, because in the next 30 minutes I'm going to show you exactly why you're not just observing your life, you're collapsing it into existence. And why the physics community has been in denial about this for almost 100 years. Ready to go deeper? Let's dive in. Here's how the thought experiment works. And trust me on this, understanding this setup is critical to everything that follows. An atom approaches a semi-transparent mirror. It splits. Half its waviness goes into box A, half goes into box B. Standard quantum mechanics, nothing controversial yet. But here's where it gets interesting. Box A contains three things: a Geiger counter, a bottle of cyanide with a cork, and a cat. A living, breathing, perfectly healthy cat. If the atom enters box A, the Geiger counter fires, the cork gets pulled, cyanide released, cat dies. If the atom enters box B, nothing happens, cat lives. Simple, right? Either the cat is alive or the cat is dead, depending on which box the atom entered. Except, and here's the kicker, in quantum mechanics, before observation, the atom doesn't enter one box or the other. It enters both boxes simultaneously. It exists in what's called superposition, a state of being in multiple places at once. And if the atom is in both boxes at the same time, then the Geiger counter is both fired and unfired at the same time. The cork is both pulled and not pulled. The cyanide is both released and contained. And the cat? The cat is both dead and alive, simultaneously. Not a sick cat, not a dying cat, not a cat in some in-between state. A perfectly healthy, thriving cat and a stone-cold dead cat existing at the same exact moment. As Schrödinger himself wrote, the entire system would contain equal parts of living and dead cat. Now pause with that for a moment. Let that sink in. Because this isn't just weird. This is absurd. This defies everything you know about reality. And here's the beautiful part, the part almost nobody tells you. Schrödinger agreed it was absurd. He created this thought experiment specifically to show how ridiculous quantum mechanics becomes when applied to everyday objects. You see, Schrödinger had a conversation with a pragmatic colleague who kept insisting that atoms don't have physical reality until they're observed, and Schrödinger pushed back. Hard, he said. Wait, you're telling me that my looking at an atom created that atom to be at the place I found it? His colleague doubled down. Yes, observation collapses the wave function. And Schrödinger said, but a big thing, a cat, a table, a human being, is just a collection of atoms. If an atom doesn't have physical reality until observed, then a collection of atoms can't have physical reality either. So the cat doesn't exist in any definite state until I open the box and look. The Copenhagen interpretation, the dominant view in quantum physics, says quantum theory applies to small things and classical physics applies to big things. There's some invisible boundary between the microscopic and macroscopic world. But Schrödinger called this out as a cop-out. Because there is no boundary in nature's laws. Either quantum mechanics is a universal law or it isn't. And if it's universal, then cats, like atoms, must follow quantum rules, which means cats can be in superposition, which is absurd. Therefore, Schrödinger argued quantum mechanics cannot be a complete description of reality. There's something missing, something we don't understand yet. And here's where this connects to you, to your life, your manifestations, your reality. You are made of atoms, your body, your brain, your thoughts, all of it. Atoms obeying quantum rules, so if a cat can be in superposition, what about you? Are you in a superposition state right now? Multiple versions of yourself existing simultaneously, collapsed into one version only when someone observes you? Do you even exist when nobody's looking at you? I know. Uncomfortable questions, questions that feel too big, too philosophical, too out there. But here's the truth. These aren't just philosophical questions anymore, because scientists have been testing larger and larger objects to see if they can exist in superposition. And the results? Stunning. Anton Zeilinger in Austria put 70 carbon atom molecules, buckyballs, in two places at once. Not metaphorically, literally. Same molecule, two locations simultaneously. Next up, proteins, viruses. When asked what the limit is, scientists say, only our budget. In 2003, researchers announced they'd put 3,600 atoms in two places at once. The boundary between quantum weirdness and normal reality is disappearing, blurring, getting harder and harder to defend, which brings us back to the cat, back to you, back to the question that won't go away. If observation collapses the wave function and creates reality, then who is doing the observing? And here's where most people get it wrong. They think, I observe, therefore I create my reality. Simple. Done. But it's not that simple. Because if you are the observer, what about everyone else? What about the cat? Can the cat observe the Geiger counter? Does the cat's consciousness collapse its own wave function? What about mosquitoes, viruses, security cameras? Where do we draw the line? Nobel Prize winner Eugene Wigner asked the same question. And his answer, his speculation, was radical, shocking, and largely ignored by the mainstream physics community. He suggested that human consciousness might actually reach out and collapse the physical wave function. That awareness isn't passive, it's active, it's creative. And that collapse happens at the very last stage of the observation process. Not at the Geiger counter, not at the photons hitting your retina, at the moment of conscious awareness, which means consciousness might be the missing variable in quantum mechanics. Let me say that again. Consciousness might be the thing that turns possibility into actuality. Are you ready to explore just how deep this rabbit hole goes? Let me ask you something, and I want you to really hear this question. Who qualifies as an observer? Think about it. In the cat experiment, we assume that when you open the box, the wave function collapses. Dead cat or alive cat, one or the other. But what if the cat itself can observe the Geiger counter? The moment the counter clicks or doesn't click, isn't the cat observing that event? Doesn't the cat's consciousness, if cats have consciousness, collapse the wave function right there? Or does observation require self-awareness? Metacognition? The ability to reflect on the act of observing? Where do we draw the line? Humans? Yes. Cats? Maybe. Dogs? Probably. Mosquitoes? Unclear. Bacteria? Doubtful. Geiger counters? Definitely not, right? But here's the kicker. Nobody knows. Nobody can tell you with certainty where consciousness begins and unconsciousness ends. Because we don't even know what consciousness is. And this drives physicists absolutely crazy because physics is supposed to be precise, measurable, objective, but consciousness is none of those things. Eugene Wigner, Nobel Prize winner, brilliant physicist, took this question seriously, so seriously that he created an even more radical version of Schrödinger's thought experiment. Instead of putting a cat in the box, Wigner imagined putting his friend in the box, a human observer. No cyanide this time, just a recording device. If the Geiger counter clicks, the friend writes X on a piece of paper. Now, from the friend's perspective, the moment the Geiger counter clicks, or doesn't click, the wave function collapses. The friend observes a definite outcome. But from Wigner's perspective, standing outside the box, his friend is part of the quantum system. Until Wigner opens the box, his friend exists in superposition. A state of having written X and not having written X simultaneously, which means two conscious observers, two different realities. And here's where Wigner made his most controversial speculation. He suggested that human consciousness might reach out and collapse the physical wave function. That collapse happens at the very last stage of observation, when awareness itself registers the event. Not when photons hit your eyes, not when neurons fire in your brain, when you, the conscious observer, become aware. Let that sink in for a moment. Because if Wigner is right, then awareness isn't just witnessing reality. Awareness is creating reality, your focus, your attention, your observation. They aren't passive processes, they're active, generative, creative. And here's the part that's both beautiful and terrifying. Strictly speaking, all you know for sure is that you are a wave function collapsing observer. You experience consciousness, you're certain of your own awareness, but everyone else, your family, your friends, strangers on the street, they might be in superposition states until you observe them, collapsed into specific realities only when your attention lands on them. This is called solipsism, the philosophical position that only your mind is certain to exist, and quantum mechanics, taken to its logical extreme, seems to support it. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds insane, egotistical, narcissistic even, but here's the thing. This isn't New Age mysticism. This isn't woo-woo spiritual bypassing. This is where the mathematics of quantum mechanics leads when you take it seriously. And most physicists, they refuse to go there. They dismiss the consciousness question entirely. They call it a non-issue. They say the cat paradox is misleading and irrelevant. Stephen Hawking famously said, "When I hear about Schrödinger's cat, I want to end the discussion immediately." Why so hostile? Why such visceral rejection? Because the alternative, taking consciousness seriously as a fundamental component of physical reality, opens a Pandora's box they don't want to deal with. It threatens the entire materialist paradigm that physics is built on, the assumption that matter is fundamental and consciousness is just an emergent property of complex matter. But what if it's the other way around? What if consciousness is fundamental and matter is what emerges when consciousness observes? Now, before you think I've gone completely off the deep end, let me ground this in something concrete, something testable, something that's been experimentally verified, the delayed choice experiment. John Wheeler, one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century, designed an experiment to test whether observation creates not just present reality, but past reality. Here's how it works with the cat. Imagine you set up the experiment and wait 8 hours before opening the box. When you open it, you find the cat alive, hungry, pacing, annoyed at being trapped. And here's the stunning part. If you examine the evidence, paw prints in the litter box, moisture in the water bowl, scratch marks on the walls, everything confirms that the cat has been alive for the entire 8 hours. Now imagine you open the box and find the cat dead. You call in a forensic veterinary pathologist. They examine the body. Time of death? 8 hours ago. Right when the atom would have entered the box, your observation now, 8 hours later, created the appropriate history. The cat didn't exist in a definite state until you looked. And when you looked, reality retroactively filled in the details to create a consistent timeline. You didn't just collapse the present, you collapse the past. Wheeler's experiments confirmed this prediction. Your observation now determines what happened then. And this isn't theory. This isn't speculation. This is experimentally verified quantum mechanics. So let me connect the dots for you. Let me show you what this means for your life, for your manifestations, for your reality creation practice. If observation collapses the wave function, if consciousness might be the observer that matters, if your awareness now creates not just present but past reality, then you're not just witnessing your life story, you're authoring it in real time, every moment. But here's the radical shift, the part that changes everything. You can't manifest from the position of wanting, of needing, of desperate hoping. Because wanting implies the thing doesn't exist yet. Needing creates a wave function of lack. And if your observation creates reality, you're collapsing yourself into a timeline where you continue to want and need but never have. The quantum field doesn't respond to desire. It responds to observation, to the certainty of collapse. You have to observe from the state of already having, already being, already living in the reality you want to create. Not because it tricks the universe, but because that's how wave function collapse works. The observer effect isn't about positive thinking. It's about definite observation, certainty, coherence. And here's the beautiful paradox. The moment you stop needing reality to be different, you become capable of collapsing it into something new, because you're no longer observing from lack. You're observing from wholeness, and wholeness, coherence, is what collapses the wave. Now here's where most physicists push back. Hard. They say, the cat paradox is a non-issue. You can't isolate macroscopic objects from their environment. The wave function collapses long before any human observer opens the box. And technically, they're right. Let me explain why, and then I'll show you why their dismissal misses the point entirely. Any macroscopic object, like a cat, is constantly observed by its environment. The cat emits photons. Those photons interact with the walls of the box. The box observes the cat. More than that, the cat has mass. The moon's gravitational pull on a standing, living cat is different from its pull on a lying, dead cat. The cat is entangled with the moon, with the tides, with the entire universe, and this entanglement happens in, as one physicist calculated, a tiny fraction of a millionth of a second. The cat's wave function becomes completely entangled with the rest of the world almost instantly. And entanglement is observation. Entanglement is collapse. So the cat is never really in superposition. It's alive or dead from the moment the atom enters or doesn't enter the box. Period. End of story. And the Geiger counter? It's already a macroscopic object. The moment the atom interacts with it, the wave function collapses. No human observer needed. This is the mainstream position, the Copenhagen interpretation. And it goes like this. Science's role is to predict the results of observations, not to discuss ultimate reality, not to speculate about what's really happening when nobody's looking. You'll find the cat alive 50% of the time, dead 50% of the time. That's all quantum mechanics predicts. That's all it needs to predict. Consciousness? Irrelevant. The cat story? Misleading. The whole debate? A waste of time. Stephen Hawking wasn't joking when he reached for his gun. But here's what they're not telling you. Here's the part they conveniently leave out. The entanglement explanation just pushes the problem back one step. It doesn't solve it. Yes, the cat entangles with the box entangles with the moon entangles with the galaxy, fine. But when does the entire system collapse? When does the universe as a whole go from superposition to definite state? The Copenhagen interpretation doesn't answer this. It can't answer this. Because it refuses to engage with the question of what observation actually is. And here's where the cracks in the mainstream position are starting to show. Experiments keep demonstrating quantum behavior in larger and larger systems, not just atoms, not just molecules, objects with thousands of atoms. Objects approaching the scale where we'd expect classical behavior to dominate. Anton Zeilinger, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2022, has been at the forefront of this research. He put 70 carbon atom molecules in two places at once. Buckyballs, large complex structures demonstrating pure quantum weirdness. When asked what the limit is, he said, "Only our budget," meaning there might not be a limit. The boundary between quantum and classical might not exist. In 2007, Physical Review Letters published a paper stating, "The race to observe quantum mechanical behavior in human-made nano-electromechanical systems is bringing us closer than ever to testing the basic principles of quantum mechanics." Translation: we're getting dangerously close to seeing macroscopic quantum effects. Effects that shouldn't exist if the mainstream interpretation is correct. Thousands of atoms in superposition, billions of electrons each simultaneously moving in two different directions. Bose-Einstein condensates spread across several millimeters. You can't dismiss this as just weird behavior of things we never see. We're starting to see it. We're starting to engineer it. And every time we push the boundary further, we make the consciousness question harder to ignore. Because if a 70-atom molecule can be in two places at once, what about a virus? What about a bacteria? What about a microscopic organism with primitive awareness? Where does observation happen? Where does collapse occur? The materialist answer, it's all just decoherence and entanglement, starts to feel less like an explanation and more like an excuse to avoid the real question. And then there's the delayed choice experiment, the one I mentioned earlier. The experiment that shows observation now creates reality then. This has been verified, repeatedly, in multiple labs with different experimental setups. John Wheeler's prediction that you can choose to observe a particle as a wave or particle after it's already passed through the apparatus has been confirmed. The photon doesn't decide whether it went through both slits or one slit until you decide how to measure it. Even if that decision happens after the photon has already passed through, your future observation creates the particle's past behavior. And if that doesn't shake your understanding of time and causality, you're not paying attention. This isn't philosophy. This isn't mysticism. This is peer-reviewed, experimentally verified physics. And it suggests, strongly suggests, that consciousness plays a role in collapsing the wave function. Not just any consciousness, your consciousness. The awareness reading these words right now. Because you can't have a delayed choice experiment without a conscious observer making a choice. The experiment doesn't run itself. The equipment doesn't decide. You decide. And your decision, your observation, reaches backward in time and determines what happened. Most physicists squirm when you point this out. They prefer to focus on the equations, the predictions, the measurements. They don't want to talk about consciousness because consciousness is messy, subjective, unquantifiable. But the experiments don't care about their discomfort. The data doesn't care about their philosophical preferences. Reality keeps demonstrating that observation matters, that the observer can't be separated from the observed. And here's the most radical implication of all, the one that connects directly to your manifestation practice. If your observation creates reality, and if that observation can reach backward in time, then your present state of consciousness is literally creating your past, not just your future, your past. The timeline you remember, the history you've experienced is being collapsed into definite form by your observation right now. Which means changing your observation changes your history, not the facts, the meaning, the significance, the emotional charge. You're not stuck with the past you remember, because that past is being created by your present observation of it. This is why healing works, why reframing works, why perception shifts create real changes in your experience. You're not reinterpreting a fixed past, you're collapsing a different past into existence. And the quantum field? It allows this. It permits this. Because time at the quantum level doesn't work the way you think it does. Let's go deeper. So here's what we're really talking about. Strip away the equations. Forget the technical jargon for a moment. What's actually at stake in this debate? Three things. Three profound questions that cut to the heart of what it means to be human, to be conscious, to exist. First, does reality exist independent of observation? Is there a physical world out there doing its thing whether you're looking or not? Or is reality fundamentally participatory, requiring consciousness to actualize possibility into definite form? Second, does awareness play a fundamental role in physics? Is consciousness an emergent accident of complex matter? Or is it a primary feature of the universe, as essential as space, time, energy, and mass? Third, what are the limits of science? Should physics only predict the results of experiments? Or should it attempt to explain what's really happening when nobody's looking? Schrödinger and Einstein stood firmly on one side. They believed science should explore what's really going on, that there is a reality beyond measurement, beyond observation, and that our job as scientists is to understand that reality, not just predict experimental outcomes. The Copenhagen interpretation stands on the other side. It says, science's role is merely to predict results, nothing more. Questions about ultimate reality are metaphysical, meaningless, outside the scope of physics. And Schrödinger called this attitude defeatist, a cop-out, an abandonment of the scientific quest for truth. But here's the thing. This isn't just an academic debate between dead physicists. This affects you, your worldview, your relationship with reality itself. If the materialists are right, if consciousness is just neurons firing, if observation is just information transfer, if reality exists regardless of awarenesses, then you're a passive witness to a predetermined universe. Your thoughts don't matter. Your attention doesn't create, you're along for the ride. But if Schrödinger and Einstein and Wigner are right, if consciousness plays a fundamental role in collapsing the wave function, then you're an active participant in reality creation. Your awareness matters. Your observation shapes what becomes real, not metaphorically, literally. And here's where the scientific community is starting to shift, slowly, reluctantly, but undeniably. In May 2000, Physics Today published a cartoon about Schrödinger's cat. The editors noted this would not likely have been published 20 years earlier. Quantum mechanics textbooks now feature a live cat on the front cover and a dead cat on the back, a playful acknowledgement of the paradox they used to dismiss. Conferences addressing the quantum enigma and consciousness happen almost every year now. Professional physics journals reference the cat story with increasing frequency. Something is changing. The conversation is opening. The questions that were once taboo are becoming acceptable topics of serious scientific inquiry. Why? Because the experiments won't stop. The data won't cooperate with the materialist narrative. Reality keeps demonstrating behavior that suggests observation matters. And physicists, even the skeptical ones, are running out of ways to explain it away. John Wheeler, one of the greatest minds in 20th century physics, put it beautifully. Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to happen. That somewhere, right here, right now, in the space between observation and reality, in the mysterious process by which consciousness interacts with the quantum field. And that's something incredible? It's you. Discovering that you're not separate from reality, not a witness to an objective world, but a participant, a co-creator, an observer whose very act of observation collapses infinite possibility into definite form. This is the philosophical stake, the existential question at the heart of Schrödinger's cat. Are you in the universe, or is the universe in you? And the answer, the radical, uncomfortable, liberating answer, might be both. Neither, something beyond the dichotomy entirely, a reality where observer and observed are inseparably entangled, where consciousness and matter co-create each other moment by moment, where you don't just live in reality, you collapse it into being with every observation. Let's bring this home. So where does this leave us? Where does this leave you? Let me bring this full circle, back to the question that probably brought you here. If consciousness creates reality, why can't I control what I manifested? And here's the answer. The answer hidden in the cat paradox, hidden in wave function collapse, hidden in the delayed choice experiment. You are controlling what you manifest every single moment. You just don't realize it. Because you're not observing from the state you want. You're observing from the state you're in. When you want money, you're collapsing a wave function of not having money. When you need love, you're observing from a state of lack of love. When you try to manifest health, you're affirming the reality of illness. The quantum field doesn't respond to your desires. It responds to your observation, to the state you're collapsing from. And here's the radical shift. You have to observe as if the thing already exists. Not hoping it will exist, not believing it might exist, observing from the certainty that it does exist. Because observation collapses, wanting extends, needing delays, hoping keeps it in superposition. But definite observation, coherent awareness, that collapses the wave. And consciousness, your consciousness, is the variable that determines which possibility becomes actual. Not because you're special, not because you have magical powers, but because you're a conscious observer in a quantum universe. And that's literally all it takes. The cat in the box doesn't stay in superposition because you're not looking. It collapses because something observes it. The environment, the Geiger counter, the entangled universe. And you collapse your reality with every thought, every focus, every moment of attention. The question isn't whether you're creating your reality. You are. You always have been. The question is, what reality are you collapsing? Because here's what the delayed choice experiment proves. Your observation now creates not just your present, but your past. The timeline you remember is being collapsed by your current state of consciousness, which means you're not stuck with the story you've been telling yourself. You're not limited by the history you remember. Because that history, that timeline, is in superposition until you observe it. And how you observe it now determines what it was then. You can collapse a different past, a past where you were always worthy, always enough, always supported by the universe. Not by denying what happened, but by observing it differently, by collapsing a different meaning from the infinite possibilities contained in every moment. And the future is even more fluid, even more responsive to your observation, because the future exists in pure superposition, all possibilities equally real, all timelines equally available, until you observe, until you collapse. And what determines which timeline collapses? Your state, your coherence, your certainty, not hope, not belief, certainty. The kind of certainty that comes from understanding, deeply understanding, that you're not in a universe. You're collapsing a universe into definite form with every moment of awareness. So here's my question for you. The question that matters more than any scientific debate, more than any philosophical argument. What reality are you collapsing right now? In this moment, with this breath, with this awareness? Are you observing from lack or from wholeness, from fear or from coherence, from separation or from entanglement? Because the quantum field is listening, reality is responding, the wave function is collapsing based on your observation. And the most beautiful part? You get to choose. Every single moment you get to choose what you observe, how you observe, from what state you collapse. Now, this is observer effect number 19. And if you think what you just heard is controversial, wait until you see what's coming in episode 20. Because the greatest scientific mind of the 20th century tried to destroy everything we just discussed. Einstein himself looked at quantum mechanics and said, "This cannot be right." And what happened next? The battle that followed, the stunning way it ended, will change everything you think you know about reality. I'll leave the link to episode 20 and the full playlist in the description. Trust me, you don't want to miss what Einstein discovered and what it means for your ability to collapse reality. Drop one word in the comments. One word that captures the reality you're choosing to collapse right now. And if you're ready to go deeper into how consciousness shapes the quantum field, hit that subscribe button. Because this series, this is just the beginning. The rabbit hole goes so much deeper than you can imagine. This is observer effect number 19, and what comes next will blow your mind even more than Schrödinger's cat. Are you ready?